So this is a government-mandated seminar straight from the dictaphone, and it's to sedate the masses by temporarily providing people with a government-sanctioned method of lo-fi thermal printing. And this is something I've been screwing around with for a few months now. It involves using a thermal printer. In particular, I'm using a Brother Pocketjet 6 to basically do something that's adjacent to old thermal imaging devices, such as the Thermofax. Reading about that machine is what got me started with trying this technique. It's pretty similar to old school mimeography, albeit without the mimeograph machine. And the fundamentals of this technique are how the rhizo printers work. And when I say that, I'm referring to the risograph, but you also use the same techniques to burn digital screens for print Gaku or print Goku or however the fuck you want to pronounce that thing. Anyway, this isn't an original idea. It started as an original idea, but then I went down a rabbit hole reading forum posts from people who had used fax machines to make mimeograph masters. I saw people making their own printmaking ink for block printing with rice flour and acrylic paint. So I decided to try screwing around with thermal printing, and it led me here. Hopefully this tutorial is useful to anybody who wants to try this technique out. So to start things off, you'll definitely need some form of relatively precise paper cutter. I use a thing called a cutter bee, or something to that effect. I got it at a thrift store, and you can see it in the picture below. You're also going to need a rhizo master, and like the cutter bee, you can see the one I use in this image. Note about the rhizo master. It may seem expensive to purchase, but each box comes with 2 master rolls. Each of these rolls can make tons of screens, like I'd guess probably thousands. I don't think I'll ever even use one roll in my lifetime, so factor into this the fact that I paid $25 for the 2 rolls, and it seems more than fair to me. I don't know, I mean, I can make a ton of screens out of them. But then you're going to also need a fine line glue pen, and any type will do. Like the other 2 things, you could see the one I used in the image. But yeah, with regards to the glue pen, you're only ever going to use it to line the actual edges of the paper to glue down the master. I'll get to that later, though. Then you're going to need a thermal printer and some sort of photo editing software. I use an old version of Photoshop for my photo editing software. And as stated previously, I use a Brother Pocketjet 6 thermal printer. Photoshop is free if you're a dirty scoundrel who has no regard for the law. A Pocketjet 6 will set you back about $25 to $40. You can sometimes look out and find them for cheap on auction sites, though. Like I said, too, most Thermofax machines, tattoo stencil burners, and label makers work great for this as well. So don't feel like you've got to use the Brother because I use it. You'll also need a standard letter-size sheet of cardstock. This is to glue the master onto, actually use to burn your screen. You can reuse the same sheet over and over and over again. That's what I do. And this is all the material that you'll need to get started with actually making the master. This isn't like your standard printmaking material, and we'll get to that later. So first, boot up Photoshop and manipulate your image to your liking. In order to print with decent detail, the image has to be relatively high contrast. It needs to be black and white. I do this in Photoshop by playing with the threshold filter, along with lighting, contrast, and shadow/highlights. Use of photo editing software is sort of out of the scope of this video, so I'll link a tutorial by Lyric Kincaid on how to create a decent Thermofax image with Photoshop. The same rules with regards to Thermofax tutorial apply here. So yeah, I'll put that in the video description below. So after you manipulate your photo for printing, you're going to want to mirror it, and I always fucking forget to do this. Like, you won't believe how many times I forgot to do this and then went and printed the image, and I'm like, oh fuck, it doesn't look right. Everything's screwed up. I'm going to have to like go jump off a cliff or something now and like just never do this again. But yeah, make sure you flip your image, because if you don't, then once you go and print it, you'll have a mirrored version of your source image. So after that, after you flip and everything, take the image and put it into like LibreOffice or Word or Google Docs or whatever, and size it appropriately. So now that you've got your image ready for printing, start by measuring and cutting off a piece of the rhizo master roll about the size of your standard piece of letter-sized cardstock. Then use a glue pen to very lightly, and like I said, just around the edges. Like, you really don't want to put too much glue on this thing, because then you'll tear your master when you're trying to actually pull it off of the cardstock backing. So take that and trace around the edges of the cardstock and adhere the master to it. Then you'll need to get an X-Acto knife and or scissors to cut away the excess master that sticks out. If you don't do this, then when you go to actually print, you'll jam your printer, and there's really no way around that. And then either your image won't burn, or yeah, you'll jam your printer. Once the master sheet is adhered to the cardstock and fully prepped, load it into your printer, following whatever protocol exists for your printer on loading cardstock. Now is the time when you should check your printer settings and make sure they're adjusted appropriately. I like to adjust the head in my printer for close to maximum heat, and if your printer has an option to adjust the speed, set that as low as it can go. This is useful for obtaining a more detailed print. If everything is set properly, then you can print your image out, and if you've done everything correctly, the image will be burned onto the master, and you'll be able to faintly make out its details. So now I'm going to talk about the most painful part, mounting the burned master onto a frame. I made my frame from the back of an old clipboard. There are a fuckload of clipboards at thrift stores, so this is a great option. You can also use cardboard or plastic. I've seen people going and making like 3D printed frames, and not for this sort of stuff, but for screen printing in general. I mean, I think that's overkill. Just make sure the frame is slightly smaller than the actual master. I like to use painter's tape to tame my master to the frame, as it's relatively easy to remove and doesn't tear the master as easily as something like duct tape. I start with one side and then tape the master down with the shiny side pointing outward, so the dull side points toward the inner part of the frame. After this, I pull the other side up so things are taut, and then I tape that side up. Next, I tape the other two sides and pull on the previously taped sides to make sure that everything is totally taut. Screwing up here can pretty much totally destroy your prints. You want to make sure everything is as taut as possible and no wrinkles exist on the face of the master. This step can take me an hour to get right sometimes. It's painful. It sucks. There's like no way around it really. Unless you manage to get one of those old Mimeograph machines or something, then you can like set it, fucking crank them out, I guess. I don't know, like find the space for it somewhere. Next, you'll want to make your printmaking ink. I do this by using wheat paste, which you can make very cheaply. Look it up if you don't know how to. And then acrylic paint, which I get from craft stores or thrift stores. With respect to the acrylic paint, I've yet to find a brand that doesn't work, except for really old paint, which is dried out, and the shiny/sparkly paints. If the paint has glitter in it, 100% it's going to clog your screen, and then you'll have a bad time. I bought some acrylic paint for 25 cents from the clearance rack at craft store. That stuff works great. Seems like cheaper paint works better for some reason. I'm not really sure, but with respect to wheat paste, I've seen a lot of people using nori paste online for amateur mimeograph type stuff or block printing. It doesn't work any better than wheat paste. I've tried both. The only difference is that nori is more expensive to make here in the U.S. Wheat paste is pretty cheap to make, like really, it's basically free. Get some sort of like tray or cup or something to mix your ink in. Like I use a little paint dish. Throw a glob of wheat paste in whatever you're using to mix your ink, and then put some acrylic paint in, roughly 3/4 the amount versus the wheat paste you added. You want this stuff to have the consistency of some good old sweet baby Ray's barbecue sauce. You shouldn't be too watery or too pasty. You probably want to have whatever you plan on printing to out right now as, yeah, that's where you're at in this stage of the process. I use cardstock. You can get it really, really cheap at thrift stores. Usually it's like $1 for 100 sheets. So get your cardstock and then place the screen on top of it with the shiny side of the screen pointing towards the cardstock. Then take some sort of scoop and put a little bit of paint on the dull side of the screen. Then you can take a paintbrush or a squeegee. I tend to use a paintbrush. I like the paintbrushes from Daiso. They're pretty nice. Spread the paint out thinly. You should be able to faintly see the image you burned into the screen through the layers of paint. So brush the paint around and make sure it's fully worked over the image. Then pull the image, and in the words of EEV blogs, Bob's your uncle. A little bit of ink goes a long way. Like, yeah, trust me here, it's really hard to use most of the ink you make. I wind up managing to do it, but definitely tread lightly so you aren't being overly wasteful with things. And that's all. Sorry I didn't go into greater detail. Hopefully this video was useful, just from discussion of the technique and helping to turn more people onto this, maybe. Well, have a beautiful night and a great Halloween coming up here soon.